So today is Monday, November 25th, 2019. My name is Alexandra Ruby. I'm joined here today by Bryan Dyer, a Salem State University student and Navy veteran. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today, Bryan. Welcome.
Thank you, Alex, for having me.
Of course. So we're going to start off with the questions. So I see that you grew up in New York, Atlanta, and Nashville. What do you remember most about these places?
Interesting startup question. I grew up in Georgia. I was born in Atlanta at Scottish Rite. That is now another, believe it's called a children's hospital now. My family didn't come from means, so we were, I remember being young and my mom working 2 or 3 jobs, and when my parents got divorced at like 4 after quite a few domestic abuse assaults, we left for New York we were in Brooklyn for about 2 years. Moved back to Atlanta, where my extended family, they were part of a very distinct religious group that was in the midst of a battle of being known as a religious cult. So I remember a lot of religious discussions around the dinner table. Christmas wasn't celebrated, so a lot of the normal American kid-like things we just didn't celebrate. So it was a unique experience when I look back on it 30 years ago. But my mother got remarried when I was 6, and to a pastor of a church who was a former Army Ranger, and he was in the National Guard. He was in the Gulf War I, and he saw some frontline action, and he was a very dominating alpha male. If you think of a 6'4" man with arms size of tree trunks, who could fix anything with his hands, and just dominated a lot of conversations, and didn't have a very high EQ. He always wore a really thick leather jacket around everywhere. And he was one of those guys that he had a gun and a knife on him at all times, and he lived that way. But they got married. We moved to Nashville, where his job was, where he was stationed at, and that was, I guess, a brief part of my childhood.
Right. What was it like to move around to such different places?
Chaotic.
Yeah.
There was a lot of underlying tension about what was next. The positive side of being in a military family and moving a lot is that you get to meet a lot of people, and you build a lot of transient relationships that teaches you to build and establish quick acting friendships, if you will. And so, not having a lot of roots, I think that it actually carries through 38 years later.
And you mentioned that your family's religion was cult-like, and I did see that in your bio. Would you be willing to explain a little more about that?
Sure. It's an Eastern Asian philosophy that surrounds that's based in Christianity, or rooted in Christianity, but it has a lot of very deep ties to, like, not Buddhism, but more Eastern Asian, like vernacular surrounding, like, they use a lot of extensions of Christianity, and then they push out and they say they're the only church, that they are the best. Like, all the churches are a baseline, they are the best church. And so when you're a part of them, you get indoctrinated by going 5 or 6 times a week to church, conferences every holiday. They don't celebrate Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, any of the traditional American Judeo-Christian holidays that we do. So you live kind of in the world, but outside the traditional world. And anything that, even going to high school, college, any of that it's based around your church life. It's not based around your education. So this whole idea of, like, liberal thought and being able to explore any type of educational discourse is just, it's not only not used, or it's frowned upon. However, Um, what they do say is that you have to get a bachelor's degree because they realize that people that have bachelor's degrees have higher degrees of success and they can get back money to the church, and they can be, the more success that they have, the more that the church is. So there's some vestiges of like Scientology also involved in it. LDS, it's similar to that. But yeah, my grandparents were a part of it. They settled the first church in Atlanta, and being elders in the church, I was expected to take on a role in the church, which was hard to do because my stepfather's over here preaching Pentecostal, my grandparents are over here preaching that they are the only church and they're the overcomers, and I was pulled in both ways. So, but we also lived right next to a. We lived next to Pulaski or near Pulaski, Tennessee, and we used to go to KKK rallies, and because that was just part of our culture. And as a kid you don't see that as wrong, but then as an adult you spend a lot of money on therapy to get over stuff like that. So, but yeah, that's a little bit about it.
How would your parents have described you as a child?
Depends on what time. My father would label me as a pain in his ass. Smart but reckless. And my mom would say that I was always argumentative, but always trying to figure, insatiably curious. And she still says the exact same thing now. She's like, "Can't you grow up?" I was like, maybe. But there were times when she would say I was a giant pain in the ass, but I was, her favorite son because I challenged her at all times. But yeah.
And what was your relationship like with your family growing up?
I was a black sheep, so my younger brother was, his name's Patrick. He's a second lieutenant in the Army. He actually just got back from Kuwait a couple weeks ago, but he's always been the rule follower, the golden child. He didn't really challenge things, and I challenged everything because for some reason, I wanted to know why we did things and for what reason, not just tell me to do it and do it. And so those traits still lie today, but I'm curious about everything, so. Yeah.
And has your relationship with them changed since being in the Navy?
Since being in the Navy or growing up? In the Navy, they said that it gave me discipline, maybe a sense of purpose, focus, identity. It took some of the chaotic pieces or the negative pieces of having ADHD, and I was able to put a framework around it and a control around behaviors. So I would say that it was for the better.
What were your views on the military growing up?
My grandfather was in Korea. He told me some pretty cool stories about going to Hawaii and eating pineapples that they were off base, that they weren't allowed to eat because pineapples are highly acidic until they've actually matured. So when you pull them off and eat them, they actually burn your lips and they leave like a terrible red mark around your lips, and everybody knows about it except for the newbies that came in. And so he always told that story fondly. He never really talked about his service, about some of the stuff he saw in Korea, until later on, as he neared his death. But then we were able to have those conversations. My stepfather was always he was a pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment. I'm going to protect my hearth and home by all means possible. Spare the rod, spoil the child type of parent. So they were very much pro military, but everybody's pro military in America because we worship at the altar of the military industrial complex. So um, sorry, that's a narration, but
That's okay. What were your family and friends' reactions to finding out about your decision to join the Navy?
my mom slapped me. And for good reason. I didn't tell her my decision or plan. It was very. I'd been talking about it for about a year after 9/11. So I joined September 29th of 2002. So it's about a year and 2 weeks after 9/11. We were just about to head into Iraq. I think we had just put special forces on ground. And I was 20 years old. I was working at a collection agency. My grandparents, I mean, they were pretty wealthy, and they said that they would pay for me to go to school as long as I abided by the church's rules and regulations, which meant moving in with people that I had grown up with, moving in with them into what is called the Brothers House, and it's basically this 6 or 7 person house that everybody has their own room and living space. But the typical college experience isn't that. You have to serve at the church, which is right next door, and you have to do all these things. And my grandparents offered me a free ride and car, and they gave me all the financial wherewithal. My parents had got divorced when I was at 18, and my stepfather kind of flown the coop, if you will. So I haven't seen him since, and it was one of those things where I just lost my purpose. What was I supposed to do? So I was working at a collection agency. I was on the phone, calling people about their credit card bills. I was good at it, but I made decent money, but I didn't have a purpose. And then one day I was at a Wendy's. And there's a Navy recruiter who was standing behind me, and I had forgotten my wallet. And he was like, "Don't worry about it, I got it." So I'm like freaking out. There's a line. It's rush hour. Like everybody's like let's get in and out. It's fast food. And the guy pays for it. I don't know. It's like a $3.99 burger or whatnot. And we go and we sit down and we start talking about his experiences. And he just happened to be a corpsman. And my mom had been a nurse my entire life, and I loved medicine. I just thought it was fascinating, and we started talking about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing anything else right now. Let's do this. So, yeah. 2 weeks later, I joined. I think that was like September 5th when I met him, 5th or 6th, and 3.5 weeks later, I was flying to Chicago, and I was on a bus where everybody was being yelled at like 4 in the morning. Like, what the hell did I just do? But my mom slapped me, gave me a hug, and she would, that was, and I think that's the breadth of all the emotions was like, this should have been better planned, but I'm proud of you for making this decision.
And what was a typical day in boot camp?
So I went in September 29th. I didn't realize that the weather was going to be something that a southern boy had never seen before, and that is wind and cold and brutal cold and snow and savage ice hitting you in the face. Like, I just remember the weather being just awfully terrible. This is Great Lakes, Illinois, which is right next to the Great Lakes. Like, the wind that comes off of there is something I've never experienced before and hope to never again, even though I'm in Boston, so don't know what I did there. So yeah, it was the typical day was you had every day was typical, except the human response to it wasn't typical, because every day was laid out from you. You wake up at 5 to revelry, which is a Navy a Navy kind of motto, if you will, to wake up. And then we would run to the bathroom, get cleaned up, shower, shave, and then we come out and then get on the line and get inspected every single day. Every day except for Sunday. And even Sunday was sometimes a little chaotic, but every moment of your day was planned. So what that does to you, it breaks you down as a person into just following this timeline. You don't think outside the timeline because later on it's preparing you for deployment. And when you're deploying, like, you need to be able to just do things with muscle memory no matter how fatigued you are. And they were teaching us that kind of self-discipline to be able to say, like, I need to get this done, this done, this done, prioritize. And so every day was the same, with the famous Nine Inch Nails song, but every day was different as well because you never knew how people were going to react because people are exhausted, people are learning, they're changing, everybody is changing into this machine to get things done.
And was boot camp what you expected?
Yes and no. It's exactly what you expect, but you are never prepared for it. If anybody says that they are prepared for it, they are telling you a bold-faced lie because what you're doing is they put 200 males in a room, all from 18 to 29, or 17 to 29, in a very long room without anything except for the same function: bed, blanket, your gear, and your locker. Everything's clean and organized and tidy, and you're asking everybody to work together as a team, as a collective whole. I guarantee you, if you tried to do that on this campus, try to get 200 people together, what you would find is a crazy amount of chaos and nothing would get done. So the military is incredibly good at that, and they've been doing it for years, and you put in that kind of structure and that institutionalization, and people learn to work together. It's the most diverse place that I had ever been to. I grew up in a very white culture. I'm sure that there's a better way to say that, but I grew up in a culture that distinctly didn't have any African Americans or women around me because our church didn't really bring in African Americans, but they also didn't bring in a lot of the women that we weren't allowed to be around the women either. So when I went to boot camp, it was the first time I'd ever had to work with African American kids from the street, farm boys from wherever, urban kids, middle class kids. Like we were all just kids trying to get along and make it through boot camp.
Can you talk a little bit about what a day in the Navy was like?
What a day in the Navy. Every day was the same. Every day was different. Once again, boot camp teaches you that you learn to deal with it as on the fly. 99% of the time you're doing, I wouldn't say nothing, but 99% of the time it's not chaotic, and that 1% of the time it's the most chaos that you can ever imagine dealing with. Some people have different experiences as well. Almost everybody has a different experience. Let's just say that. Just because we're all trained the same doesn't mean that we all come out the same or have the same experiences or have the same reactions, the same challenges. So when I was with the Marines for my first 4 years, I was stationed down at Parris Island and in Jacksonville, or Camp Lejeune, if you will. It was the best years of my life because I was surrounded by. I had an identity as Doc, as a corpsman. We were known as Doc, so basically we were the doctor in the field. So it gave me, I wouldn't say a sense of power, but a sense of responsibility and pride and identity that just being a sailor doesn't typically give you. Like some people probably get that from what they do, but I had a very unique experience, if you will. So my days with them was different because it was very alpha. It was very primitive, and not primitive in like a bad way, but it's like going to a primitive cabin. It lacks a certain comforts that you would have, and sometimes you want that and get that. I met some fantastic Marines who are great people, and I had amazing experiences with them. I also met some pretty terrible people, but that's the military though. Like, you can't. Everybody's experience is different. When I was blue side and I did 2 deployments, it was pretty much the worst days of my life because my identity was just as a sailor. It wasn't anything special anymore, and every day was exactly the same. 12, 14, 16-hour days, 5-hour watches where you're just staring at the ocean. And, at night the ocean is the darkest black that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And I just remember being, how are you so free, but when you're 200 miles out to sea, you're really not free. You're imprisoned. And I just remember it being really very, very stressful, very chaotic, and also very boring. Yeah.
What was it like running combat operations?
As much as I'd like to say that I had some really cool stories about that, combat operations, we did two operations, and they were basically drug interdictions, and I had no idea what I was doing. As I remember, the chaos and stress. You can't get over like this boat. It's like 400 feet? 400 feet long. There's 200 people on it. No, it's more than that. It's 200 yards. Forgot. But so we're on a frigate. So if you look at it like a battleship, the game, a frigate is the equivalent of the 2-prong ship. Just this big, has 2 prongs you can put in it. A battleship has 5. So we're on the small boat, but we're in part of a much larger fleet movement. So we have destroyers, we have cruisers around us, we have helicopters everywhere. And we are circling this 4-masted boat, which 4 masts means that you can see 4 masts at the horizon. So from like 6 miles off, you can see 4 masts. That's how large it is. So to kind of civilianize that, if you go out to the Boston Harbor and you see like a boat with like all the Connex boxes on it, that's probably a 2-masted boat. So I don't think they can do a 4-masted boat here. So, but these are very large. They're territories, if you will. They're massive, massive pieces of equipment. And so we would circle around it for 4 or 5 days while they're getting interdiction notices from the DEA liaison for that city or country, and then that country is reporting it to the embassy in DC, and DC saying go ahead and do it. Then we make an ops plan around it. And as a medic, I didn't have any kind of overall ops strategy. I was there as a function, as a tool. But we worked with our Coast Guard liaison. So we had six Coast Guards narcotic interdiction people that their job was to work out all day, make sure that they're in prime shape, and then they would, every now and then, we would jump on what is called a rib, and that's a rigid boat. And what we would do with that is you would have this frigate right here that's about 20 yards off from this massive, massive beast of a boat that just, I can't fathom the size difference. And the water displacement is pushing the water up and down. So these 20-foot swells are just going like way high, and you're just bouncing up and down. They put you in this boat, and you're just holding on for dear life. It's a good thing I love whitewater rapid. It reminds me of whitewater rafting now. So we would go over to the other boat, and then they would let down a ladder, and we'd have to climb up this. And it's a steel ladder, but it's one of those flexible ladders, so it just kind of, you're just kind of hanging on for dear life trying to climb up this thing. And all my guys are armed to the teeth, and I've got, a 60-pound medical bag. And I just remember being, like, looking down and being like, don't ever look down again, because next time you do, you're going to fall in the ocean, and nobody's saving you. And because there's no way to be saved. Like, it's... so we climb up, and then my guys take two go this way, two go that way, and then I'm back here with the senior leader, and I think he was a chief at the time. It was a first class, he had chief there. And I go, what are we expecting? He's like, most of the time these things are peaceful, sometimes they're not. I'm just like, okay, he's cool. He's cool, calm, and composed. I'll present the same way. And, it really showed me one thing, that, like, everybody believed that the war on drugs was a success, but what I saw there was, I saw poor people who were just trying to make a living. So it dramatically changed how I looked at, like, what our policies and whom they really affect. The first one we went in, there was nothing there. We spent about 8 hours on the boat. We didn't find any, like, cocaine and or any terrorists, which were kind of the two mission parameters. So then you climb back down, and mind you, there's a helicopter surrounding us, and they have a 50 cal on it as well. And I'm talking to some of these guys, and they're just poor farmers. Like, they're poor sailors. They get paid like $10 a day to stay on this boat and transport stuff, and they get food and water, and they send it back to their families, just like I was doing. So I really felt a true connection with the people instead of the policy. The second one was a little more rough. We took some gunfire. One of my guys was hit. It was the first time I had ever experienced that, and so he took a shot. It hit it was a shoulder wound. It passed through, and I hadn't trained on this stuff. Like, I had 3 months of training. I had never seen this or experienced it. And you hope that you would come out as a warrior or a hero, but my training just kicked in. Whether I did it right or wrong, I don't know. The guy lived. It wasn't a terrible wound. He was medically retired later, because it did injure one of the nerves, and so then we had to get the helicopter come out, and then they brought down a stretcher, so we put him on there, and they carted him off, and then they sent him back to that home country, which happened to be Peru at the time. And it was weird that we were attacking this this boat, and it was coming out of Peru, and then we were sending people back there for medical treatment. One of my guys did shoot another one of the enemy combatants, and I ended up having to try to stabilize him. He eventually did pass away while I was trying to take care of him. And it's one of those things where it's surreal. It's this surreal moment that as a medic I'm required to not take care of myself. I'm required to take care of the enemy who's taken a hostile position against me, but I have to give my all to take care of them. And there was really no reason for us to be on that boat in the first place. I mean, we did find like $8 million worth of cocaine, but that's a drop in the bucket. That's not anything. So after that, it was I saw a few people pass from just like heart attacks and things of that nature. But I actually saw more people with worse traumas when I worked in an ER as a hospital technician than I did in combat, if you will. But I missed out on one thing, and that was going to Iraq with my best friend Chris. We had grown up together. He and I joined at the same time, 6 months apart. Ended up in Camp Lejeune together, in Paris Island together, and then he deployed to Iraq, and he went twice. And I did these 2 deployments, and it was like our experiences were drastically different. You know, he was doing helo insertions into bases, and kicking down doors, and he was living the dream that we had both trained for. And when I got out in 2007, he got out in 2008. So we kind of missed that boat.
So what led you to leave the military?
I was told we were going to do another deployment in 6 months, and I'd already been out to sea for 22 out of 24 months that I was deployed there, or I was stationed in Mayport. So it didn't make. My younger brother was in high school, and he was just about to graduate, and I didn't really have a plan, but I knew I didn't want to stay in the Navy. Like, I wanted to when I was with the Marines, because I had an identity and a purpose I believed in. And when I went blue side, I lost all that purpose and identity. I no longer had any interest in wearing the blue color, the dress blues anymore. So when I had lost that motivation, I wanted to go back to college. I mean, that was originally the plan anyways, because most people join for the GI Bill. And so that's, yeah.
How did it feel leaving?
The greatest and the worst day of my life. I can clarify that. I didn't really have a plan. We had been docked for probably 2 months, and I had probably been drunk for 2 months. Still going to work, still functioning, but at night, sitting in my car, like, I didn't know how to deal with things that we had seen and experienced. And granted, I haven't seen anything compared to other people, but it's not a comparison game. And so that's why I try to teach vets all the time, is your story and how you deal with it, it's very different from everybody else's. And when I got out, I had probably 4 days, because honestly, I thought I was just going to stay in. I was selected to hit E5, and once you hit that point, in like 5 years, I was on a good track. But the thing, I didn't want to deploy to South America again. It was cool. I got to see some amazing experiences. I got to see the Panama Canal, and it takes 18 hours to go through the Panama Canal. They have these RTD2 looking robots that they put the lines on, and they just pull you through this. And Panama Canal is one of the greatest inventions of humanity. I mean, this thing's incredible how 2 or 3 countries came together and created the modern ecosystem, the modern shipping ecosystem. This is back in the early 1900s. It was an incredible experience. I got to go to the Galapagos Islands and see the gigantic 500-year-old tortoises that are there. I went to Peru, got to go to Machu Picchu. Never got to go to Argentina, but I was able to hit the bottom. What's it, Fier de Fuego, the bottommost or the southernmost point of South America. I got to see some cool stuff. Like, Colombia is one of my favorite places on earth, and I was blessed. I got to go to Russia, Germany, Sweden, see the World Cup in 2006, I believe. I got to see some really cool stuff. I got to jump in the Arctic Ocean, the Baltic Ocean. Who gets to do that? It was just such a cool experience. I crossed over the equator. We floated next to a pot of humpback whales that almost knocked us over from their water displacement. I was blessed. Like, I went to 40 countries in almost, what, 2 years? Like, I was very, very fortunate. However, I had forgotten, like, why I was there, what I was doing it for. And I didn't believe in a drug or war on drugs. Like, it didn't make sense. So, I asked them to let me out, to give me an early release so I could go back to school. Had to figure out how to navigate the chain of command because there's a rare, it's kind of an obscure UCMJ law that says that if you have the ability to leave for school and a deployment's coming up, or if you have some mediating reason that they can let you out. So I was able to use that, leverage that, and they were like, well, you've got 3 days to get out, and in 3 days I got out. I didn't have a plan in place, but I didn't care because I was free. Put my sea bags in my car. At the time I had a Mitsubishi Eclipse Spider convertible. It was a sweet car. And then I drove home. I remember looking at the ship as they were leaving for an inspection and seeing some of my friends go away. And but I had been home for 2 years. Home was this cot, that somebody else slept in like halfway through during the day, and we had to share this cot. And but that was home. And I didn't know where my next home was. I knew I was going home to my family, but like when you leave that institution, what's next? Now, they do a lot better job preparing people today than they did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had just finished the surge, or we were starting the surge in Iraq. Like, Afghanistan was at full op tempo. Everybody was just on such an op tempo that one person didn't matter. And the VA and the DOD don't speak. There's a whole lot of problems with the whole transition issue as well. But when I left, I was woefully unprepared for what the real world had, because the Navy had been protecting me, had locked me into my little fenced-in yard, and I couldn't see above the fence. And then when I got out, it was like, okay, I'm outside the fence. You ever see like a dog that just like sits outside and just barks and howls and is like, what is on the other side? And then they get outside and they're like, what the hell just happened? What am I supposed to do out here? Like, put me back in my cage,
So is that how you would describe your transition to civilian life? Like a difficult experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I lost my identity. I didn't have a uniform anymore. I didn't also realize how much things cost when you don't have to pay for food and medical benefits. That's a shocker. And also I didn't realize that my skill sets were unemployable. So as a medic, I was highly qualified, and hiring managers would say, man, you did some really cool shit out there. However, you can't do that here because you don't have a certification or a licensure. But to get a licensure, you have to become a nurse, a PA, a medical practitioner, nurse practitioner, any of these other routes. And that takes education, that takes school, that takes time. What do you do during that time? Because the GI Bill at the time did not pay the housing allowance that it does now. It paid $1,200 a month, and school is $8,000 a month. Like, these things didn't add up, and I wasn't prepared for that, so I didn't have a plan in place. And often I tell vets all the time, like, if you're just leaving for the sheer sake of leaving, then that's not a plan. You need to have like a strategic course of action, because I've learned over the last 10 years how to do it the wrong way, and so now I'm able to get back and say, here's the right way.
Has your experience in the Navy benefited or not benefited you in your college transition?
Good question. Yes and no. Of course, the discipline of like being able to do things on time, prioritize, be able to, do all-nighters and still function. All of these things are part and parcel of it. I've been out for 12 years, so my first time in college, I went to Kennesaw State University. Oh, well, I went to North Georgia College State University, where my younger brother went. So I went there for a year. And then I went for 2.5 years to Kennesaw State University. We're skipping over a point of that. So in 2008, I had a back injury, and I had had it since the military, but I didn't realize that it was bad. So I went to the VA, got it checked out. They told me I needed to have surgery. I'd already had this surgery one time before. But for about a year, they had put me on opiates. So I was on Percocet and morphine for right at a year and a half. And so heavily addicted to them. I had grown kind of numb to everything, hostile to everything. So I was pretty grouchy to be around. I was not a nice person back then. But I worked third shift, I worked 2 jobs at the time, and I had lost my identity. I lost my structure. I, was, I think, suffering through depression from these medications. And they finally said, all right, we're going to do surgery. So we had the surgery, and I was on my back for 3 months, doped up. I could barely move. For about a month and a half, I had, these tubes that are called Jackson catheters, and they basically, when your body's healing, there's 2 stages of healing. There's external and internal. And so the healing process to prevent an infection from happening with an internal injury is that they have to have something that's suctioning out all the bad stuff. And so obviously I wasn't able to work, and so I went heavily in debt, had a repossession, because I couldn't work. I couldn't work for 4 months. And I was all doped up, and I couldn't do anything, and I was miserable, and I had no identity, no purpose, no structure, no plan. I had no hope. And I think it was like at the 4th month when they said, all right, they took out the pin catheter, or the catheters, and then they took me off the opiates. And they did it in a 2-week process. And I basically lost my ever-loving mind. And I had a gun at home. I think it was 2 a.m. And my mom came over to my apartment. And she never comes over at that time because she's asleep like normal people. And I literally just put the gun in my mouth and was about to, take that ride. And she walked in, and I was so doped up that I forgot to take the safety off, and then I was like in tears because I realized that I'd been willing to do this. And she walked in and just said, she gasped. I remember her gasping and being like, I didn't know it was this bad, but this isn't how we do this. And so the next day I went off all the medications, all the antidepressants, all the SSRIs, all the Klonopin, the opiates, everything, and said I'm not going to do it again. I went cold turkey, which highly recommend never doing that. And I made a plan. It was the first time I'd actually sat down and made a plan, and wrote it down and put goals down and said, I want to do this. 2 weeks later, I was invited from a friend of mine, through a friend, to a Voodoo Warriors softball tournament. And I saw all of these people that had much worse scenarios happen to them. And I was introduced to my now manager, and very good friend and mentor, and overall, she's my superhero. Her name is Michelle Saunders, and she's an LGBTQ Purple Heart recipient. She spoke at congressional affairs for the VA, and she worked at a nonprofit helping vets as they transition out. And she gave me my first job. Now, mind you, I probably put in 500, 600, 700 applications, interviewed several places. This was the first time that I had had an actual opportunity. And now, mind you, I still had all these conflicting thoughts about the LGBTQ, whatever it may be, women in the military, because I had grown up in a very different way. But she's a freaking superstar, and I wanted to be her. And yeah, so 10 years later, she's made one hell of a difference in my life. And every year, same time that I met her, I post on Facebook this huge thing about like our story together. And I swear to God, we get like 1,000 likes and loves and all this other stuff. It's stupid, but so my transition out was pretty awful. And so now I actually talk about this, and you know, that not every vet has PTSD, not every vet has TBI, but we all have our challenges when we transition out.
I think it's so interesting how you mentioned the LGBTQ veteran. Would you say that she changed your traditional conservative beliefs and religious beliefs?
Yeah, because she's a freaking hero and a warrior, and when you stop thinking that it's a choice and it's just something that's a biological imperative, like it changes the whole conversation. But also how she treated people. She treated me as someone that she wanted to help, even though I was firmly against her lifestyle. Like, so I'm against, like, let's put this in other words. I'm against you falling in love and having the best life possible. You know, not that love is the best life possible, but if I'm against that, where do we have to connect on anything else? And I started kind of recognizing that because I'm going to colleges that have, I'm in like an all white school in North Georgia. There's very little diversity. Like everybody's a Republican except for the weird liberal that's, you know, petting her cat in the front. Now I'm in Boston. Everything's a little bit different. Now it's the conservative with orange hair in the front. But yeah, our experience together, especially working together, is that she was willing to give it all for everyone. And so she taught me what true inclusion was, and it didn't matter where or what you came from. Her belief was, if I can teach you a skill set, then you will pass it on. And she doesn't require anything else except for that. Now, do we get along all the time? Oh, no. But do I love, admire, respect her, and am in awe of the goodness that she gives back? 100%.
And you mentioned, I think, that your brother was in the military as well. Were you guys close?
He's currently active duty, actually.
Oh, okay.
He joined at 30 years old last year to become an officer in the Army. We weren't as kids. We were not close. We were 6 years apart. His father, my stepfather, like put him on a pedestal that he could do no wrong, and versus I got a very different end of that spectrum of you know, spare the rod, spoil the child type of attitude. He was very physically abusive quite often, and but when my stepfather left when I was 18, Patrick was 12, our relationship dramatically changed. We didn't see him, we never saw him again, actually. He moved out to Europe and we've never seen him since. But I became a pseudo-father, if you will, which was weird to go from being responsible for someone like that. And my mom worked 3 jobs, so I made sure that even when I was stationed in Paris Island or Jacksonville, I had opportunities to go to Japan, to Germany, but I didn't want to be that far away from them. And so I would come home every 2 weeks. I would drive home and spend the weekend with them and then head back. Over the last, so a couple years ago, a company out here recruited me and relocated me to move out to Boston to work at, it's a financial, Fortune 200 company. And they heard me speaking at a veteran nonprofit conference about employment and the mitigation of suicide, and they were like, it was the first time I'd ever spoken, first time I'd ever been asked to speak. It's weird. But I got a call the next day. It was like, hey, we want you to come out here and interview for this role. And I was like, okay. So flew out to Boston, never been here before, didn't know a single soul, didn't even know how to get anywhere. It's a small place actually. But I moved from, I took the role, sold everything on Craigslist, I had an English master's at the time to pass this summer. Put him in the Suburban, so I ran the Suburban one way. My brother flew out and we took a road trip across country, went to Niagara Falls, ended up back in, so we got to Boston the day before I was supposed to start, and he was like, you know what, I'm going to join the Army. And I was like, okay, this is a series of rash decisions. He's like, I've been thinking about this for like a year or 2 years. We've talked about this for 10 years. Like, if I'm going to do it, I have to do it now. And so we did. 2 months later, he was accepted to go to officer candidate school, and he went to boot camp, which Army's kind of strange like that. They make you go through boot camp, then they make you go through officer candidate school. Then he went to his A school in Virginia, or his Supply Corps school in Virginia, and then he got stationed in Colorado Springs. He was there for about a month, and he deployed in February of this year to Kuwait. Just got back in October.
Knowing everything that you know today, would you still have joined the Navy?
Hell yeah. Yeah, 100%. Honestly, it's my whole career has been based around my military experience. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I wouldn't have traveled. I wouldn't have. My life would be different. Like I don't think it would have been anything without it. But it also gave me the ability to be persistent in face of all odds. And yeah. Hell yeah.
Awesome. What made you want to be a recruiter?
If you think about what recruiters do, and you think about as a medical practitioner what I did, I changed lives every day, whether it was somebody coming in for a sore cough, a rash, sprained ankle. I was there to help and heal and guide them to their best self. And that's what I do as a recruiter every day. I look holistically at somebody's story, not just their resume, not just their background, but I get to look at their whole story and help guide them to their best self. And that's what I do every day. That's why I have a startup in the recruiting space as well. That's why I'm completely open and forthright about my life, is because authenticity rings so much more true than somebody just trying to sell you on a job.
How did you come up with the idea of your startup?
This summer I was diagnosed. I had a tumor on my ankle for about 10 years. Everybody said I went to 5 doctors. They all said it was benign. And then this summer I was running. Believe it or not, I was down to like 215. I have like 245 now. But this summer, I was diagnosed with an aggressive cancer called synovial sarcoma. And what that is, it's basically a joint cancer that can attack to the bone. And once you have osteosarcoma, it metastasizes to the lungs very quickly. There were some things that were in my favor, that I'd had it for as long as I had without any symptoms. However, they were really nervous about it, so I had to quit my job. I took 2 months off, and I had surgery this summer, and the VA did a great job. About a month later, I was back on my feet, if you will. But while I had time to sit there and contemplate what I was going to do for the next 2 years of my life, because that's the sentence they gave me for 2 months was, you have 2 years left. um, how's that going to make a difference? And every day I would just look at my ankle and be like, you have to make a difference. And that's where we're at now. I basically looked at all the things that were wrong with the recruiting space today, and there's some great people out there who are working diligently on making the hiring process better and improving it, but it's all based on the wrong thing, and that's the client's needs, and the client's needs change 24/7. Instead, I want to look at the candidate and how do we upskill people, especially those who come from marginalized backgrounds, and get them to the same place that they need to be instead of, no offense, I know this is an education system, but if we can upskill diverse and marginalized groups, we can help them get the equity that's needed for them to be not only diverse but also inclusionary positive. So that's what I'm working on.
Do you want to talk more about some of those nonprofits and sort of like go more into that?
Sure. So in the veteran service nonprofit world, you have about 48,000 nonprofits in America right now that are focused on the veteran, they would say problems, I would say challenges. Most of these are mom and pop shops that help one or two people. About 10% of these groups have massive human capital structures, meaning that they have a lot of people out there that all they do every day is talk to vets and try to get them into their best life. I personally think that we have moved so far to the right because, for we're 3 generations removed from a true war like Vietnam. We're 5 generations since, we lost hundreds of thousands of people in World War II. But we have moved so far to the right of that we have created this cast of people that go and serve, and typically they come from marginalized communities. They come from places where there's a lack of means, and the pendulum has shifted so hard because we want to help all these vets, but nobody wants to serve themselves. And I personally think that these nonprofits, so they may have a great mission, they can't scale, and they create donor fatigue. And so I think it's incredibly valuable to start to use technology to leverage what these VSOs do. And that's what we're trying to do.
Let's talk college. What has your experience been like? What are you studying?
I hate to say this. I'm studying industrial and organizational psychology, which is basically the science of how people work on a macro level, and how they can work better. So I would like to focus on talent development. I don't think that it'll be I think this is going to be a longer process than I'm being provided here, but it's been interesting because I don't come from academia, I come from operations, and so I come on campus and I've been fed the wrong information multiple times from PhDs who, don't get me wrong, they've worked their ass off to get where they're at, but if you haven't been operational with what you've been working on, like, then it's just concept, it's abstract, it's theory, and when you're talking about people, you're talking about a lot of different things that go into that, and that's not just because you read it in a book that it makes it true, because sometimes things aren't like that. Prime example, my first day in grad school, my professor at the time, she goes, this is a great career field to get into. Once you're done with this master's degree, you'll be able to make $50,000 coming out, and that's a base salary. And I was like, one, I've been making 6 figures like for 7 years or 6 years. this doesn't make sense to me. This doesn't add up. There's something wrong here. And when I brought that up, she goes, well, the base salary, the median salary. And I'm like, well, I get that, ma'am, but like, maybe we should tell them that there's a flex range there. There's quintiles that a lot of these people are going to be able to match. And I, as a recruiter, would never ever tell somebody with a master's in IO that I'm going to pay you $50,000 a year. Never going to happen. And she was like, well, that's what I see. And I was like, yeah, maybe because on campus, but businesses need these skill sets. They need these even more than MBAs. Like, these skill sets, you need to be talking to these kids about like how they can upskill their backgrounds and make sure that they do internships and co-ops. And so I went into the whole hiring process, and she was like, it was one ear out the other, because she spent 15 years studying this stuff, and I'm a first day grad student, which I get. I totally understand. But even in undergrad, my favorite professor, who I'm still very, very close with, the way that she made a difference in my life was she showed me how academia and operations came together. She's now a practicing attorney, and she taught for like 20 years, but she was just a fascinating person to be around, and she was like, she made class and school interesting. She made sure that we were passionate about what she was like, even if we didn't care about what she was talking about, like, she made it fun. She made it like we should be interested in coming to school. I mean, we're paying to come here. And I haven't felt that way in grad school. I felt like basically I was given some regurgitated materials from the last 10 semesters, and read these 80 articles, and hopefully you will learn something because of that. And honestly, I could just go on Google Scholars and do the same exact thing and not pay full price for it. So for me, it's been disappointing, because 8 out of the 9 professors in my program are academics. They have never been operational. They may have done some consulting work, but they've never had to make it from an AVP to a VP to a managing director level. They've never had to manage people. They've never had to manage P&Ls and budgets and figure out how to get a group of people to collaborate and work together outside of academia. And I don't, and I'm not disparaging my professors, but there is such a disconnect between my 10 years of experience and coming into academia, and perhaps I needed to be more prepared for that, because I didn't feel like that's not on them, that's probably on me. But at the same time, out of the 10 people in my class, 9 have gone from undergrad straight into grad school. And I'm the only one that has any type of real life experience. And in fact, 3 of these people came to my launch, my business launch, and they're asking me, how do I do this? How do I navigate this career search? It's so overwhelming. And they're not prepared for the real world, and though they have this education. So there's just a fundamental disconnect in the onboarding of someone into grad school, unless they spent the last 2 years and they've done that natural transition. Sorry if that was a little strong.
No worries. If you could give someone who's leaving the Navy and looking to go to college some advice, or just the military in general, what would you say to them?
Give yourself grace. A lot of us expect that when we get out, we're just going to hit the ground running, and you have to realize that the military is great at a lot of things, and it will accelerate your growth in a ton of different spaces, but it will also stunt you in other spaces where other people have that time to grow. For instance, when you're leaving the military, you've got this different world, you have this different language, your mind is set a different way. So you need to learn to give yourself grace, and also give your family grace. because they're transitioning as well, and there's 200,000 transitioning veterans each year. That means 1.2 to 1.6 million people are transitioning each year. And if you don't have a plan in place, and a plan B and a plan C, you're not ready. But more importantly, you can adapt and overcome. You know, the Marines say Semper Gumby, which is one of my favorite sayings. Always flexible. Always flexible and always faithful. And that's an important piece of it, because if you don't give yourself grace, you can flex as much as you want, but if you start to hate yourself because you failed and you haven't learned from each iteration, you're not going to survive, because you don't have the structure in place anymore. It is all on you. So give yourself some grace.
Now, before we end the interview, Bryan, do you have anything that you want to say? Anything that we didn't touch on? Any questions you think I missed?
Yeah. 3 things. Not every veteran has PTSD and TBI, so let's calm down on that. 9 out of 10 vets or support staff do not see combat, and if they do, they see it from a very far way away. Number 2, boot camp, our training. These all create resiliency factors that are never considered in somebody's combat experience. Some people are prepared for combat. Like, this is the reality of the situation. You go through this training for a reason. It's not like we're going out there and we're completely new to this world. Yes, we are, but there's a piece of it, that resiliency piece, that is often overlooked. So just because somebody's seen combat doesn't mean that they're all fucked up. Excuse my language, but it's America, right? And then 3, vets are the same as other people. Let's stop putting them on a pedestal and just start helping them out. If you have a vet in class, it's cool to tell to get their story out, but have them socialize and reintegrate in that class. Have them go and sit with a group of liberal feministas, and have them work on a project together, because the only way that we can reintegrate into society is to allow us that opportunity. And if we just remain cliquish, it's going to be every vet feeling like they're alone.
All right, thank you so much, Bryan, for everything.
Sorry about that.